Hello and welcome back to the Real Estate Roundup podcast. And in today's episode, we're going to be sitting down here with real estate professional in San Antonio, Texas, Tony Flores, to talk about the three different ways that you can actually pass on your property ownership to your potential heirs as inherited properties. So, we're going to be covering inherited properties in today's episode and sharing with you guys the three different ways in order to actually transfer that ownership before you pass on and and move on into the next life, if you will. So, Tony, welcome to the show, man. I know we had our previous episode earlier this past week. That you weren't available, but you're out there getting things done. So, what's been new with you?
Keeping busy, working with people that have different needs, whether they're going through probate, or they are preparing for someone's unfortunately, as family members age and they're having health issues. There's some family members that are doing some things, taking some steps that are helping them prepare for kind of what they're seeing as what might be the after death. What's going to happen with properties. And so that's some of the things that I've been spending having some attention towards. And so wanted to share some great tips and the different things to think about and things to consider. Of course, anytime you're talking about legal matters, you certainly want to consult a lawyer. And I'm just going to share some experiences, some of the things that I've been through here.
Yeah, yes, that's. I think it's going to be a lot of value that you will provide to us today. So you've gone through a couple of these transactions as an agent
Mhm.
before. So why don't you kind of walk us through the three different ways that people can transfer their ownership of their properties to their heirs? In the state of Texas.
All right. Well, there's probably more than three ways, but we're just kind of focus on these three that in particular. So in Texas, or I operate out of Texas. In Texas, we're going to go through three scenarios. All right, and one of them can actually help save money if there's can save money through probate, can save money through different ways we're transferring asset. In some cases, for example, had a client that their loved ones, their brother was in health a serious health decline. They had been put in a nursing home. Unfortunately, the health outlook didn't look good. Um, this person was still cognizant, still able to make decisions on their own, still able to fill out documents as needed. And so what they did was they filled out what's called a transfer on death deed. And it's known as a transfer on death deed, or some people refer to it as a ladybird deed. And so this is a really, really great option for a lot of people, because what happens is the family members can essentially transfer title upon their death. This is something that can be revoked before they die as well. It's not a permanent, but if nothing changes and if they have signed it and used a notary public and got the correct form filled out, it must go also be filed at county records prior to that person's death. So the steps are: state essentially who you want the deed of the property to go to, right? Two, fill out the proper forms, the legal forms, and name the beneficiaries and or one or more beneficiaries and how that deed will transfer. They get it recorded, they get it signed with the notary public, and it gets recorded in the county records. So that's going to stay stagnant. It's going to be in the county records. In this case, they had more time. This individual passed away in 2021. I'm sorry, they signed the deed in 2021 and they passed away in 2024. Upon that individual's death, they actually the people that were the heirs, which happened to be a brother and sister, were able to file now get something another form filled out, which was the affidavit of death. So they have the transfer on death deed filed at the county records. Then they complete a affidavit of death. Of course, they have a death certificate as well. And of course, getting a death certificate in Texas might take up to maybe 2 weeks or so. But all this kind of stuff can happen pretty quickly. Of course, you want to leave, there's certainly time to grieve and things like that, but there's not necessarily a probate required for that property to transfer, and it skips that step of having to go through that long process, which takes many months. So this was a simple process. They were able to get it sold within about 6 weeks after their brother passed away, and it everything turned out well for them.
Yeah. So that's the first way to actually transfer, right? Is through what you call here in Texas a ladybird deed, right? Which is
Right.
a transfer upon death deed as well, kind of more the technical term of it. And this is something that you would have to do before, right?
Right.
The unfortunate incident happened. So this is something you want to have planned ahead.
Yes, they state their intentions, who they want it to go to. Again, it is revocable,
Mhm.
and then it gets filed to county records, and it pretty smooth process as far as paperwork wise, not very complicated at all. Another way would be to file. The family can file what's and this could happen, and we're talking about something intestate, which means that they didn't have a will. This is something that can be done if they don't have a will, and we do what's called an affidavit of heirship. An affidavit of heirship essentially states, okay, this individual was had and it states their family, kind of like their family tree. This individual was married between here and there. This individual had child one, child two, child three. What where they might be as far as if they had children as well. It just kind of paints a family tree of who these who the deceased person would have heirship, who would fall under the heirship tree there. Okay, so that we fill out the form, and then that form then gets taken to the lawyer. The lawyer will complete an affidavit of heirship. Then the title company will review that, and they'll use it based on the laws of Texas and say, okay, well, based on this, the property can be sold, and the people that will get the money will be ABC or however it turns out. So in Texas, the heirship kind of goes down as far as heirs. If there's no heirs, one way and downwards, then they go sideways, which would be brothers and sisters, things like that. And if there's nobody there, then they go upwards as far as there's any family members there above. And of course, there can be a lot of complicated families, but that's kind of the basics of it. We can also include something here that I use in Texas, and we'll include that probably in one of the links. I'll get that sent to you, which kind of just helps paint the picture of who gets what. They're married, so marriages affect the the way it gets divided, and of course, children, whether they are in one marriage or in a separate marriage as well. So there's lots of different ways. Texas already has it figured out how they want it divided up. So if there's no will, that's the way it can be done right there. And so want to take a look at that affidavit of heirship.
So the affidavit of heirship, right? That's the second way of essentially, transferring property, and it kind of goes through the laws that Texas has already set out for the state, right? Like you mentioned, they determine kind of the hierarchy of where this property, who this property will belong to, and what ownership, whose ownership will it transfer to based on the hierarchy. And then there will be, like you mentioned, Tony, a link in the description down below on a little bit more details on what that might look like. So is that something that, again, is that something very similar to the Ladybird deed where you need to file this beforehand, or is this something that just kind of goes into play, as things happen?
This would happen after the person is deceased. It doesn't happen before. Very commonly people don't have a will prepared, and then So the state has to decide, and the state already has their own rules of how they're going to expect the estate to be divided if there is no will. Now, if there is a will, of course, then there is a process going through probate.
Got it. Yeah. So explain to us that process as well, the probate process, and what it looks like if somebody does have a will prepared, and how that works as far as what happens after the property owner passes away.
Yeah. So if somebody does have a will, they have it. Of course, you want to make sure that they have it shared with others, their family members. Everyone knows where it is. If they have more than one, then the last one that has been would be the one that is expected to be the one that's going to be used. So you want to make sure you have the latest one. If it's been a while that somebody has prepared a will, they might want to take a look and see if they want to get it reviewed. And obviously, the best person to do that would be a lawyer to review it, make sure that if anything's changed, take care of that way. So through the probate process, essentially, it is a court process. It does need to be taken care of in the county in which the person passed away. Okay. So, of course, you want to get set up. You want to talk to lawyers, probate lawyers that handle this. And then typically there's going to be an executor or executrix of the estate. And what they will do essentially will be the manager of the estate. They will make decisions based on the will of the decedent, the person who has passed away. They're going to go and look at the assets. They will take an inventory. One thing that's really important also through the probate process is even though there might be people that say, oh, they said they wanted me to have this, or they said they wanted me to have that. If it's not in the will, it's really everything's part of the estate. It's really important that people really don't kind of, go in and out of the estate and take things out that haven't been finalized on those items, because essentially they won't know unless it's written out. And so some of those processes has to be done through the court and the executor of the estate. So of course the estate, if it being real property, then that will be discussed, and they will typically say, for the most part, most people want that property will want that property to be sold. That's the easiest way as far as dividing that asset up. And through that process, typically there's lots of different things that need to happen before that, which could be cleanup of the estate. Sometimes there's going to be donation of things. There's going to be estate sales. There's going to be a whole process. And that's something that, of course, that I can help facilitate it, because I work with several different trusted vendors, and I can help through that process as well.
Oh, okay. So that's something that, as a real estate professional, right, usually doesn't happen, but because you're specialized kind of in that area, in that realm, you do have trusted vendors that you can actually help people with through most of that process. So that
Right.
way they can get things ready. And if they want to choose to sell, the property that they've inherited through that, then they can do so as well. So kind of going back just to, ask a little bit more about the second option, which is, the affidavit option as well. So the option where, if you guys don't remember, basically it kind of just kicks into effect automatically. So you mentioned if somebody has like multiple children, right? What happens to the ownership of the property if an individual does indeed have multiple children? Is this something that just kind of gets divided up evenly between them, or is there some type of hierarchy there as well?
Yeah. So it would be divided amongst the children evenly. And, but if say, for instance, if there's a spouse that's still living, then the spouse really has that. They don't need to necessarily worry about that. But typically, the children, yeah, if there's 3 children, it'll get divided by thirds, and so forth. Just proportionally to them. If we're talking about something that's intestate, which is without will.
Interesting, right? So that kind of brings us to what I wanted to ask you as well, which is kind of the decision, right? Because a lot of people, if there's maybe one person who inherited a property, or maybe like you mentioned, a group, right, that inherited a property, a group has in like just multiple heirs that inherited, they're having a decision at that point, right? Not necessarily, uh, they don't necessarily have to sell the property for a profit or proceeds, right? They can choose to keep it. So kind of weigh these options as a real estate professional, right? What are some of the potential benefits of maybe keeping that property, especially if that property, maybe let's just say ownership is divided between two or three or more people, versus selling it and just kind of taking the proceeds and dividing it up evenly amongst whoever inherited it.
So if somebody's interested in keeping that property for themselves, then typically a way to absolve that would be, okay, let's get an appraisal on the property. Let's see what that property asset is the opinion of value from the appraiser. And of course, there can be more than one appraisers and more than one opinion, because at the end of the day, appraisals are opinions of value, and of course that value can go up from one person to the next. So is likewise, a person that wants to keep that property, they feel like it's very valuable. That asset essentially can be, in I guess the best term to say is just monetize that asset, to say this value would is considered to be X. And then, however many people are it would be divided by, well, how are you going to compensate the others for that property worth X? And then that discussion happens, and the other family members can decide on how they want to handle that. If they want to do different things with their division of the property, then we have to have discussions upon that as well. But they could work something out between them. Every family and everybody has different ways of doing things, and of course you can bring different professionals to help with that, mediators and uh, financial professionals. If they have enough money to give the others, then it doesn't seem like it would be much of an issue. But if there could be an issue if there's, well, I don't have all the money to pay you off right now. Well, what can we do next? Okay.
Yeah, so it's pretty much up to the specific situation of the inheritors and the heirs of the property, right? After the owner passes away. So, kind of going back into the probate process, you mentioned a little bit about kind of what might go into that process before, a property might be ready to sell, if that is the decision that the heirs make. So, what are some of the things that people should be prepared for, as far as probate process, in order to clean, just like you mentioned, clean up the estate and make sure that everything is either liquidated or everything is, kind of put into the right places, so that way they don't have, things hanging above their head, as they kind of continue moving forward.
A real good thing. I guess the main thing is, it's very common that in certain families there's going to be one person that might have a little bit more time or might be more dedicated to kind of getting things organized and dividing up that asset. And there is, for the administrator, there is allowed some compensation for what they're doing as those duties. But it's common that there's going to be, one point of contact that's really the spearhead for getting things done. Recently, for instance, I had a lady that I was working with that actually was three different sisters, and one of the sisters passed away. Another sister lived here in San Antonio, and another sister lived far away. So, of course, who had the brunt of the taking care of that property? It was a sister that lived here. She was also the executor of the state as well, but there was just so much that she and her husband had to go through. Going through documents, doing a thorough clean out of the property. There's just a lot of things, and sometimes, they're already going. Families are already going through a grieving process when they lose a loved family member, and that's already tough. And just in some cases, it makes it even tougher when they have to go through so many different things and kind of look through. Essentially, what you're doing is opening up their whole, their life there that's unfolding there, everything that was there physically, you know, anything from books, photos, and different things like that. So it's just a very tough process for a lot of family members, but typically there's one person that's really um, helping throughout the the process. And ideally, you're trying to get these things, some of these things, clutter, and what other people would say with clutter, just to kind of keep it free and clear as much as possible. And in some cases, people are very aware that their end of life is going to be coming up, and some people are just very, very structured, and they'll actually fill out their obituary for themselves. I had a family member that had done that, had done so many things, and it made things, the other part of the process, easier for her family members. And so, you know, unfortunately, some people, it's tough to think about the end of life, but at the end of the day, everyone's gonna face it, right?
Right. Yeah. It's a difficult time, I think, for a lot of people to go through that because there's a lot of technicalities, right? There's a lot of uncertainty. It's, people don't tend to go through this process over and over again, right? It's not like a normal thing or a, regular occurrence. So with them, something like this does happen, especially if it's like the first time a family goes through it, there could be a lot of just difficult processes involved. So having somebody there to help mediate, having somebody there to help you provide the right vendors in order to help you, just go through it without more headaches that could come up, I think is very important for families to consider. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of items and assets that for from the outside looking in, there's monetary value on it, but for family members, there's also an emotional value tied
Right.
to it as well. So for them, it can be a very difficult time to part with these things, and there's a lot of a lot of emotions involved as well. So I mean, I'm sure you would agree, Tony, that having a professional there to just guide people through it, make sure that things are being explained clearly. They don't have to, families don't have to go back and redo things that were done incorrectly or not properly. It just makes things it makes things not necessarily easier, but it doesn't make things harder where it doesn't have to be.
Right. Yeah. One thing that I also want to bring up again, so when we're talking about the cost of getting things done, in many cases, the transfer on death deed is probably the the quickest way to get things, something like this, resolved, because it already is going to say, hey, these are the people that I want the deed to go to, instead of the affidavit process. And then the probate process, of course, it will be a longer, drawn out process. Could take 6-9 months to complete a probate, because there could be a lot of different assets, and it could be, there could be disagreements on different things like that. And of course, the courts, waiting for the courts timelines, things like that. So the transfer on death deed can save money also if there's any other things that could get in the way, of different people laying claim to the property. In some cases, of course, everyone wants to make sure you consult an attorney. The transfer on death deed uh, can help essentially, if there's different processes. Transfer of death deed essentially happens on it is a transfer of the deed upon death, and it just has to be recorded ahead of time. So I want to make sure that people know that that's a pretty simple process.
So that's a good tip, actually, or good advice, because it can help people save time, save a lot of headaches, right? Help their families save headaches, and also make things very clear. Is what it sounds like. So the transfer on death deed makes the decision very clear, and
Yeah.
you do this ahead of time, so that way it helps you save money and also prevent unnecessary issues or headaches down the line
Right.
when you do
Yeah.
pass away.
Yeah. In some cases, if someone's been a beneficiary of Medicaid or other services like that. There's a look back period, discuss things with your professionals, and that can uh, help bypass some of those things that don't necessarily need to be addressed upon death.
Right. Yeah. The main thing is just making sure that everything is done. If you have this information, right, take action early and then be prepared so that way, when the day does come, right, there isn't a big, long, dragged out process that has to follow that
Mhm.
creates more stress for pretty much everybody involved and more headaches as well. So if you're taking the information, if you're able to make things easier, make things clearer, then after somebody does pass away, it does make the just the process of transference and determining who owns what much easier and much with much less ambiguity, if you will.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Tony, man, I appreciate you sharing all this information with us here today. I think there's a lot of people who, maybe in a position to consider this information, find it very valuable because this is something that I don't think people look up on social media every day and, try to find this information unless they need to. So
Mhm.
it's good that you're providing this information for people who may be in need of something like this in the near future or in the long time future as well if somebody is planning ahead. So appreciate you guys. Make sure to reach out to Tony directly if you guys have any questions or are looking for somebody to help you through a process like this or similar to this. Tony is a wonderful real estate professional in San Antonio, Texas, who has, so you can probably tell, quite a bit of experience with handling these situations and helping guide his clients through that as well. So make sure to reach out to him. His contact information is in the description down below. But other than that, I appreciate you. Appreciate you tuning into the show, and we'll see you on the next Real Estate Roundup. Take
All right.
care.